Hey, welcome back, everyone. Sunny, I don't know if you were getting us started or if you wanted me to.
You can kick it off for us.
Okay, awesome. It's 9:40, so hopefully everyone had a good break and you're all ready to get started with our next panel. Um, as Sunny said earlier, my name is Leslie Gallagher, and I sit on the NAFSMA Board of Directors. I also serve as the Executive Officer for the state's Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And you heard earlier from my colleague Darren Suin about some of the efforts we've made in the state of California to address the specific issue of damage to our state plan of flood control facilities due to human habitation, specifically in the form of digging holes into the levees throughout the valley. For me, one of the best parts about this event today is to know that we're not alone. For me, when we first encountered these issues, we had no idea how widespread it was. Was it just in California? Were people having these homeless problems everywhere? And I really want to thank Susan and Sunny for putting this event together and then making it free for everyone to participate. I've been a board member at NAFSMA for about 4 years now, and I can tell you they do a really tremendous job representing us, public agencies, with our federal partners. So if you're here today, but you're not yet a member, please consider an investment into this organization. I have found it to be well worth the investment, and I know you would too. So there's my PSA. To get us started with the panel, I want to take you back to a simpler time. I'm going to share my screen here for a second. If you all can see that photo. David Mile High, you probably recognize this, but for everyone else, I took this picture recently when I was on a trip to Colorado. This is the Arkansas River at Mount Princeton Hot Springs. And I was initially fascinated by that chair that's sitting in the middle of the river. But on closer look at the opposite bank, I noticed these, wrecked cars were piled all up along this embankment, all the way down the river. Staff at the resort told me that back in the early 1960s, this was the Army Corps' answer to bank erosion, and it was done quickly and relatively inexpensively.
Leslie, the image isn't showing. The image isn't showing, Leslie.
Oh, can you see it now?
There it is. Yep.
You guys see that? Yeah. So here's the bank of the Arkansas River, and those are the wrecked cars that are used as riprap, or they used to be used as riprap back in the 1960s. I think, as everybody knows, today we have no quick or easy answers to our issues. And this is one of the things we're talking about today. Let me stop sharing so we can get back to our panelists. There are no quick or easy answers to the complex flood risk reduction issues we face. But as Sam Ekman told us earlier this morning, some of our colleagues are addressing the homeless levy issues in interesting and creative ways. The following panelists from Nevada are here to illustrate a creative program and structural fixes they have employed in Clark County. Joining us today are Lieutenant Chris Gorell from the Las Vegas Police Department and Abigail Morena, a principal civil engineer from the Clark County Flood Control District. I've gotten to know Abby a bit in preparing for this panel, and I can tell you she has an impressive resume, including 15 years with the Clark County Regional Flood Control District, where she manages the capital improvement program within unincorporated Clark County and the city of Henderson. She's involved with funding, design, construction and maintenance work, and program review and coordination of flood control facilities with the local departments. She updated the district's flood zone database when letter of map revisions are issued, and her involvement with homeless issues and flood control facilities started when she became a Floodplain Management Association director at large. Before I turn it to Abby, though, I will turn the panel over to Lieutenant Gorell for a discussion on the Las Vegas Police Department's coordination program with nonprofits and houseless support services. Lieutenant Gorell?
Hey, good morning, everybody. And first off, I apologize to not be completely virtual with you guys. We kind of have a block on some Zoom stuff from our agency, and so you'll just have to kind of hopefully bear with me, and I make this as entertaining and insightful as possible. And thank you guys for having me so I can go over our homeless outreach team and what they do and how they partner with our social service providers and our UNLV students. So I'm going to give you kind of a little back history. Our homeless outreach team was created in 2018 because we saw a very growing need to kind of have a different approach to how we dealt with the unhoused population and the encampments that we started to see more and more of. Fast forward to this year, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department established our behavioral health unit, and that is where the homeless outreach team now resides. And along with the homeless outreach team, we have our crisis intervention team that deals with our subjects who have mental illnesses, are in crisis, or happen to be admitted several times due to police contact for those mental issues. And then we also have our law enforcement intervention for mental health and addiction. And that is our substance abuse kind of outreach with the 8th Judicial Court, where we're allowed to provide 90 to or 6 to 9 month treatment programs paid through a federal grant to get these individuals the help that they need. And so as we looked at it, homeless outreach felt right underneath that, because we know although they might be homeless, they might be also suffering from some substance abuse issues or maybe have some mental health issues. So it just made sense to move them under all the behavioral health units. So we have those issues as we are doing the outreach. So as we look at what the outreach team does, it is a sergeant and has 8 officers, so 4 different teams, and I'll kind of explain how they're broken up and how they partner, but they conduct complete outreach only. They do not do any enforcement efforts. They don't write tickets. We don't forcibly remove them, and it is strictly on an outreach. They go out there with either social service providers, faith-based organizations, and some of the ones that we partner with the most are Help Us Southern Nevada, Salvation Army, and West Care. And so what we do is when we find an encampment, or we are made aware of an encampment by one of our 10 area commands that break up the geographical jurisdiction of Las Vegas Metro, we go out there 1, 2, maybe 3 times, and we try and get as many people outreach as possible with those partnerships with the social service providers, the faith-based, and all that. And we're able to offer them either, transportation, housing assistance, resource connection, meals, cards, transportation, reconnection with their loved ones or their families. And then also now, because they fall under the behavioral health unit, if they have that, criteria to be entered into the LIMA program, we can then offer them 6 to 9 months housing to treat some of those issues, with hopes that they are able to remove themselves from homelessness. Now, after we have done research, or after we have done our outreach several times, we then let the area commands know that the outreach is done. And then we all know that there does have to be that piece of actually for the quality of life and for the other people that live in the area to go out there and work with the providers, either the city, the county, or the Nevada Department of Transportation, to provide those cleanups for those encampments. And then we set up a follow-up time frame to where our outreach will then go recheck to see if that encampment has stood back up, and then go through the cycle again. Because what we really want with the behavioral health unit and our homeless outreach team is to be able to get as many of these people that are in this population, either the resources they needed to help get themselves out, or to completely remove them from the homeless environment. And just to kind of give you some stats of where we are, since the inception of this unit, we have been able to contact almost 24,000 unhoused individuals, and 7,000 of them have taken services from us. Now, when we talk about those services, that could be anything from, like we said, they just need food, or they need to get an ID or a shower because they have a job interview lined up. And we will do everything we can to get them and help them try and establish where they need to go to better themselves. And we've had almost 1,000 individuals that we have been able to completely remove from homelessness this year to date. And then if you look at how big the problem is, we have had to do cleanups, or the area commands have had to do cleanups on almost 5,000 encampments since the inception of this program since 2018. As we look at this, some of the other things that we've established, we also have a homeless court that is ran through the Las Vegas, or through the court system here in Nevada. And it's kind of, if I can relate it to, if any of you are familiar with drug court, it's used for traffic and minor misdemeanor offenses. When the subject is homeless, they get put on calendar, and instead of being charged with that crime, we have our service providers that are in those courts, and if they successfully complete, those services that are ordered by the court, those charges are then dropped, and it's specifically directed through a hearing master in Las Vegas. And those citations are, when they're marked unhoused individual, they go straight through that court, because again, that just gives us another opportunity to provide outreach and try and establish some sort of rapport with these people and realize that the police aren't there just to always take them to jail. We're trying to build those bridges and create those collaborations. So when they see us out there with those service providers or those faith-based, then, they're starting to get used to seeing that, and they just don't think that we're there to arrest them and throw their stuff away and clean it up. It's really coming up with that different approach. This year, one thing we've added to this program is our partnership with UNLV. That's our university here in Nevada, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And we now are using interns from the social services master's program to do their actual in-field work. They're kind of partnering with us in our different aspects of behavioral health to include the homelessness. And they are just another bridge to kind of create the next generation of partnerships between our community members, our unhoused, and law enforcement, as they're the next people that are going to be coming out and actually getting those jobs. So we're giving them a chance to kind of develop them and see the problem and help address the problem as part of their student program to receive their master's degrees. Some of the challenges that we face, and I know a lot of the talk has been on the tunnels and how do we do that, is, as we all know, the tunnels are very hazardous. That's one of the challenges. They're very unsafe if you go deep, especially if you can't see the end. So how far we can actually get in there as law enforcement and the homeless outreach team is kind of to where we see. We try and call people out to offer them the outreach. And it's really a challenge when we're talking about cleanups, just because you don't really know what's in there, whether it could be gases, the floodwaters, or anything else. Another challenge is, as we clean up some of these camps and we try and get with either the city, the county, or the private owner or NDOT, is when we put up kind of fences or barriers so in hopes to come back, they get pretty creative because they get kind of used to the areas that they've been in, and we find they find ways to get around it. So obviously now we also have the barrier of what we put up to try and keep people out, but now to get in there and redo the camp and provide the outreach around that barrier. We really started to see an increase with the COVID-19 pandemic of people that were becoming unhoused, and those are the people that we think really benefited. They just might have needed some resources to help get back on their feet. So that was a big success story. I think when you look at our numbers, the people that we've been able to contact and the people we've been able to provide some services for are one of the big success stories. And being able to have those partnerships, I heard a lot in the earlier panel, and with this one, it's, how do we build those relationships? How do we fund it? There is a lot of grants out there that these social services providers that they use, and then we're just kind of that law enforcement kind of piece of the puzzle to create that collaborated effort to try and build the trust and future the partnerships with those parts of the community and the unhoused to kind of continue that to go forward. The really biggest challenge, though, is sometimes you have to contact an individual 3-4 times before they really want to accept those services. So, going back out, finding out where they were before, finding out what camp they're at now, and really showing them that you care is that big part of the outreach. And the reason we have the homeless outreach team separate from the area commands is you really have to keep that outreach and then whatever you're going to do, reference the cleanups and all that, completely separate, because you don't want to be out there under the guise of, hey, take this resource that we want to provide you to help you out. But if you don't, hey, somebody's coming to clean you up. We keep that very separate so they understand that, hey, we're out there to offer you this. We're going to keep coming out there. But if eventually there's going to come a time where we have to come in, one of our area commands does, and provide some cleanup. And we give them very forewarning on that as the outreach team, and just continue to try and do as best we can. And I know I kind of rambled there at the end and kind of repeated myself, so I apologize. But if you have any questions, I'd like to hear them and offer any guidance that we've had and things that we've been successful on, or if you see any challenges, I can let you know how we address that as well.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant, for that. That is really encouraging to hear. And I know they're doing something similar in Sacramento. They've stood up a whole new department, the Community Response Department, that's doing something similar with encampments. If you could stay with us for just a moment, we do have a couple of questions. There was one in the chat on, do you have a time period for going back and reviewing the encampments after you've been through? Is there maybe a set time? And then the other question was, do you keep track of your success rate? I know you mentioned you had to go back several times, but are you keeping statistics on that? And if so, what is your success rate on getting individuals to accept help?
So that two very good questions. So the first one, yes, we've kind of just really put a time frame on. After the area commands do their cleanups, we then set kind of a 45 to 60 day time frame to kind of go back out to that encampment to see if it's reforming or if people are moving to another one. That's when we tend to go back out and revisit it, because that's kind of what we've seen is, you know, we do the outreach and continue to do that outreach. There is no set time. It's really when we feel, okay, we've encountered these people 5 or 6 times, they're not offering outreach, let's send it down to the area command so they can come in and do their thing. And then once they're done, that 45 to 60 day time frame is really what we're seeing, that they feel comfortable to sometimes kind of move in and start to reset up camp again. And if they do, then we'll just start the cycle all over again with the outreach, because we want to make sure that we're providing those options. The second question is, so two things I think are kind of an aspect from that, from what we do. So the city of Las Vegas and us, we have a homeless management information system, so to say, to where they document the resources that have been given to these subjects. And where that comes into play is so say we went out and contacted somebody and they only needed an ID. So we provided them that ID, but then we locate them at another camp and they're like, hey, you gave me that ID so I could do this job interview. That fell through. Now what they're really looking to do is maybe get a bus pass to go back to reunite with their family in Texas. So it kind of tracks the services that we've been able to provide them. So to make sure that we know that saying, hey, we tried this last time, we tried this next time, what's the next step that we need to do with our service providers to help this person out? Because obviously they've offered and been given these resources, this didn't work, maybe we should try this avenue. So we're not really repeating that wheel. And as far as the percentage of success stories, like I mentioned, with the 20,000 so people that we have contacted since the inception of this program, 7,000 have taken some services, and we've been able to remove about 1,000 from homelessness per our statistics. So I think the success stories are showing for themselves. One of the challenges we have, though, is kind of on the end of that is what is the recidivism rate? You know, when we say somebody is removed from homelessness, you know, we've got them that stable job or they've been able to get some sort of stable housing. What is that time frame that we should go back to kind of see if this person or this individual has stayed successful or not, is one of the challenges and one of the things that we are continuing to look at and try and determine. If that kind of answered the questions, I hope so.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's actually a couple of others, but I want to move on to Abby's presentation. If you can stay with us, if we have some time, we'll answer some more questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And sorry, Abby, if I took some of your time, I will provide coffee.
No problem, Lieutenant. Good morning. Thank you, Leslie. And I'm Abby Myrena, here to present the local approaches for structural fixes and capital planning. I have prepared a presentation and I'll share it right now. Leslie, are you able to, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
I do see it. If you can put it in presentation mode, there you go. Perfect.
Okay. So just a little bit of statistics. Here in Southern Nevada, there's approximately 5,300 persons experiencing homelessness. And of that, approximately 200 are in our channels. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the current statistic, but this was homeless census based on a January 2020 statistics. Zoning in for our regional flood control facility. On the map you see is the Clark County, Nevada. So Regional Flood administers the master plan of flood control facilities in Clark County. We are a funding agency. Our funding comes from 0.25% sales tax, and we distribute that out to our 6 member entities, which includes Boulder City, Henderson, Mesquite, Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and also unincorporated areas of Clark County. Of course, once these facilities are built, they need to be maintained, and the district also funds the maintenance of these facilities. We do not own and operate any of these facilities. All the entities own and operate them. Zoning in the Las Vegas Valley area. This is a map of our regional facilities. The blue lines represent existing facilities. We have approximately 130 miles of unimproved channels, 200 miles of improved channels, and there's roughly 300 miles of storm drains, and we also have 79 detention basins and debris basins in Las Vegas Valley. The rectangle here, just to give you a snapshot of the area. The north part is the downtown. Las Vegas Boulevard is on the west of the rectangle, which is more commonly referred to as the Strip. And then the airport is on the southern portion. So our main structural method here in Las Vegas to discourage homelessness and to prevent them from entering our storm drain facilities are grates or trash racks. As you can see, it does build up with debris and trash and sediment. So it is crucial for our maintenance crews to go out there after every major storm event, and they have frequently schedules to go out and maintain them. These trash racks are heavy, of course, and they're stout, and as a result, the picture on the bottom right shows one of our trash racks in the Strip area. Unfortunately, a homeless female who was living upstream got washed down with the flood flows, and unfortunately, she got pinned in this trash rack, and she did not survive. Other facilities focusing on in the Strip, we have a manual grate underneath the Link Casino. This is operated by casino personnel. There are boxes underneath the casino. Most of our flows come from the west and go straight to the middle, crosses the middle Las Vegas Boulevard area and goes to the east to our main water source, which is Lake Mead. So just downstream of that facility, we also have magnetic grates, this is maintained by Clark County Public Works. So once there's enough pressure, the grates will automatically lift up. Unfortunately, there can be glitches, and if that happens, water will overtop and create a hazard on the road. So what do we do to, what are other fixes that can be done? Because we have fast storms here and velocities is an issue. We do not want to compromise our structures. So there are other sections or other fixes that can be done in other areas. You can create a ponding and provide weirs, or also making the channel rougher. The reason why is people don't want to be wet. As you can see here, there has been an encampment set up in the drier area of one of our channels. This is our maintenance ramp, and so it's in a dry place. Most of our regional facilities are big boxes, so homeless people tend to store them in our facilities. As David touched on a little bit earlier, what are other jurisdictions doing? Well, for Mile High Flood District, they have depressed areas, roughly about a foot or so down the invert of their culverts, so that it remains wet. He also touched on having a smaller section so to prevent entry In areas where there's massive vegetation, they have started to systematically thin it out so you can see the encampments. There's nowhere to hide. Another structural fix on the bottom right is a grouted riprap. If it's uncomfortable, people will tend to not set up temporary camps. So these are a couple of structural fixes that other jurisdictions have implemented. Just to zone in on a couple of actual projects. This is, again, from the Mile High Flood District. This is their Sanderson Gulch. They separated the flood flows from the low flows, thereby having smaller boxes. As far as their outfall, the 33rd Avenue outfall, the initial design called for a 10 by 10. So in order to reduce the homelessness, they opted to change that 10 by 10 facility to a dual 18 feet wide by 3 feet high. And as you can see here on the bottom, they have like little notches. So it's like an infiltration gallery so that the bottom of the outlet remains wet. The focus is just to keep having a wet bottom to discourage the homeless from camping out there. Going back to Las Vegas, a couple of people mentioned fences. So most of our facilities uses chain link fences to keep the homeless out of the facilities. Also wrought iron gates, but they're easy to cut or to damage. So as a result, our Clark County Public Works has implemented using the expanded metal security fencing. This is usually used for high security places. It's superior in strength, durable to corrosion. As you can see there, there's a picture of a bolt cutter. One of our personnel is trying to cut the wire, but it's very difficult for that. It's also smaller gaps, so it's harder to climb. The main goal here is to lessen the frequency of the fencing. As far as cost is concerned, the initial cost obviously is going to be higher, but due to the constant repair that they have to do for the chain link fence, in the long run, it'll probably be the same, if not more cost effective. So, and of course, the goal is to lessen the cost. Just a couple of pictures to the pre and post of the EMSF installation. Here's a chain link fence that they had to constantly repair. So this is one of their pilot projects. They went back in and used the expanded metal product. As you can see here, unfortunately, if there's a will, there's a way. There's a bucket here that someone used to get up over the shorter 6-foot high CME fence. But the goal was achieved because it lessened the number of times they had to go out and repair the fencing in this development. Another local approach that City of North Las Vegas implemented was a pilot project to have security guards patrol the Cartier Channel. It was a 6-month trial period, started back in September of 2020, and the cost was just below $30,000. It's a lesser cost rather than having Public Works go out there and frequently clean it. I talked to the Public Works personnel last week, and they are happy to report that the pilot program is successful and that they will be adding 3 more areas for the security guard to patrol them. One of the panelists mentioned that, if we have a rotating timeline on patrolling these areas, they don't know when the security guard comes, so that helps out. In addition to the success of this project, they have added a homeless coordinator, as well as 3 dedicated police officers. They are also working on city ordinances to continue the progress, and in an effort to deter them from throwing the garbage in the channel, they will be putting out garbage cans and bags in certain areas, and the crews will come pick it up. Also mentioned by a previous panelist, partnering up is essential so that they don't just stop at where their jurisdictional line ends. So the city of North Las Vegas worked out a mutual understanding so that they can go further beyond their jurisdictional limit with city of North Las Vegas and Nevada Department of Transportation to maintain these flood control facilities. Of course, as a lot of the panelists mentioned, the approach is very essential, and offering assistance to help out with the situation. Just real quickly, this is our budget for all of our entities. The total budget, maintenance budget, comes in roughly about 14 million for this fiscal year. Of that, roughly 900,000 is dedicated to homeless cleanup. So that's about 6% of each of the total budget. And they're going to be using, they're already 75% of that bill to date, but they will be using that. That is all I have. So I can bring it back to you, Leslie, and we can entertain questions.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. It looks like we just have about 5 minutes or so. This was a really great presentation, I think, both of you. And Sunny, just as a follow-up, I don't think we have time to get into it here, but there's a really great question in the Q&A that Scott has tentatively responded to from Nancy Cole that, you know, regardless of our efforts, homelessness seems to be a growing problem. So has anyone had success in actually reducing the overall homeless population? I think that might be something to bring in maybe to our annual meeting when we do the follow-on. Scott mentions a national program called Built for Zero that has had success in a number of cities that maybe we'd like to get our members some more information on. So thanks for that, Scott. One question that I wanted to follow up with, and this is another success type question. And Abby, if you could give us a copy of your PowerPoint as well. I don't know, I think Sunny's going to make that available to everyone at the end of this program. But what about, are you keeping track of any success rate you're having using the EMSF?
Yes, we just started it, and then the county actually identified 11 or so projects that they'll be using it on. So it has been successful, and most of, as we design new projects, new channel projects, mainly in the Strip or Las Vegas Valley area, we're definitely looking at putting in that product. Also, when we do retrofit, like our flood threat recognition system gets vandalized a lot, and that's typically just protected with the chain link fence. So we're looking into using that as well. But I mean, the overall, to answer that question, is not a, I don't have the actual figure of the success, but because of the first sections that they've installed in, they are looking into other locations to put it in.
Thanks, Abby. And Lieutenant Gorell, I wanted to just end, I think this is, we're going to have to make this our last question. This might help some of our folks here. What are your options if homeless refuse to leave an area scheduled for a cleanup? How are you handling that?
So us as the outreach team, we don't handle that at all because we have no part in the cleanup. That is based on whatever protocol that specific area command has put in place. And again, you know, most of these people are on private land. So just speaking from, you know, top languages, you do have those criminal offenses, but we do give them every opportunity to leave, even when the cleanup is coming. But if they're refusing to leave either government or, you know, private property, then obviously you do have the charges of, you know, trespassing and those type of unhoused kind of low-level misdemeanor charges to use. We really try and avoid that because our hope is to get them as many resources as possible. And then if they don't, when that cleanup comes, even the area commands are like, look, the cleanup's coming, guys, you got to go. And luckily, for the most part, we get that cooperation at that point in time because they see that cleanup coming.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm going to have to make that the last question. Sunny, if we're, I'm assuming, keeping track or listing out these, if we can do some follow-ups for folks, I think that would probably be really helpful as well. Thank you so much, panelists, for being here. Lieutenant, I know you're super busy. So thanks for helping us practitioners figure out how to do this a little bit better. And with that, I'm going to close out this panel and turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Steve Parrish. Steve?
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate the transfer there. And thank you all for attending this this session and sticking around for the final session of the day. I'm really excited about this session. I'm Steve Parrish. I'm the General Manager of the Clark County Regional Flood Control District here in Las Vegas. I'm also the Vice President of NASMA. We put together a great set of panelists, I think, for you this afternoon or morning, depending on where you're at in the country. We did get 3 representatives from 3 different federal agencies to start a discussion and really get people thinking at the federal level about the scope of the homelessness problem and maybe to begin developing solutions to minimize impacts on flood control infrastructure really in all of our communities across the country. As we've been talking about all morning, local agencies have been dealing with the homeless populations for years. It's a huge problem for all of us. And we really, would like to broaden our interest in this to the federal agencies and see if we can incorporate some of their ideas and some of their abilities to address this issue throughout the country. At my organization here at the Regional Flood Control District, and you just heard from Abby, who's on my staff, expenditures for homeless encampment, as she pointed out, have been going up. They've actually been doubling every year for the last 3 years. We'll be spending close to $1 million just this fiscal year alone, just cleaning up homeless encampments. It's a huge problem for us. It's a huge expense, and it's something that we really need to deal with. We've experienced 35 known flood-related deaths in Clark County since we started keeping track of those statistics, and at least 10 of those have been homeless individuals that were swept up in flood flows and did not survive. And many times that have been people who were rescued. They weren't actually, they didn't actually die in the storm event, but had to be rescued. Which means that first responders have to go out and risk their own safety and risk their own lives to rescue these people. So you can see on this actually on kind of blew up, but on this slider there's a picture that's actually a channel. I don't know, Sunny, can you reduce the size of that? It's actually a channel that we just had a homeless encampment cleanup on. There we go. Just recently, you can see all the tents and everything set up along the access road and a lot of trash and debris being thrown into the channel. We cleaned this up about 2 or 3 months ago. It was about a $90,000 cost just to clean this one encampment. There was about 100 people living here that had to be approached. The lieutenant talked a lot about the HOT team and the outreach programs that we have. We try to get these people services and help them through their situation. Many times they decline those services, but I'm hopeful that as this program continues that more and more people, will take advantage of that. So the focus of this session is really to learn from our federal partners about awareness of the homeless issue on the federal level. If there's any programs or resources that are available or may become available to assist the local and regional agencies with homelessness issues, and maybe to discuss coordination between federal agencies with different responsibilities to help provide assistance to the local agencies. So I'm just going to run through all 3 of the panelists and give you a quick introduction to all 3 at the beginning here, and then we'll let them talk for a little bit. First up is Ms. Helene Snyder. She is the regional coordinator with the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. The Interagency Council on Homelessness serves as a bridge between federal, state, and local stakeholders to support and enhance efforts to end homelessness and facilitate connections on related policies, resources, and best practices. Ms. Schneider joined the council in January of 2018 after serving over 17 years in municipal government as mayor, council member and Housing Authority Commissioner for the city of Santa Barbara, California. And I got to say, before this mentoring session, I didn't know this agency existed. So I'm really glad she's here to talk about it and inform us on what they do. Next slide, please. Mr. Nick Schufro is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Risk Management at FEMA. The priorities of the Risk Management Directorate include producing flood hazard and risk data, assessing and translating risk information into action, and communicating risk and providing incentives to drive mitigation action. Mr. Schufro has more than 35 years of energy, financial, adaptation, resilience, environmental health and safety management, and performance reporting experience in both the federal and private sectors. And then last but certainly not least, we're really glad to have Mr. Stephen Hill here, who's the Director of Contingency Operations and the Chief of Office of Homeland Security for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Directorate of Contingency Operations has a diverse array of missions, as you can see on the screen here, generally to assist federal, state, and local emergency management and response organizations in preparing for, responding to, and recovering from emergencies. Mr. Hill serves as the agency's principal executive, and he also has over 35 years of combined experience in the federal and private sectors. So with that, we'd like to start by giving each of the panelists some time to talk about the homelessness issue from their point of view, from each of their individual agencies and the role maybe that agency can play or does play to provide solutions to this issue. And I think we'll start with Ms. Schneider. I think you have a presentation if you want to go ahead.
Yep, I'm going to share my screen here. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Can you see the slide okay?
Yes, you look good.
Great, fantastic. Well, first off, I want to thank Sunny and everyone involved here for the invitation. And just as you may not have heard of USICH, I had never heard of NASMA. So I think that's the whole point of this, to create connections and partnerships when we can. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what USICH is, but then also give some ideas that I hope will be the start of a conversation. There's no way in the short time that we have to answer all the questions, but I do want to be a resource to you and introduce my colleagues who cover other parts of the country here. But first I want to just give a snapshot of what's happening with homelessness in our nation. HUD requires communities to do what's known as a point in time count every other year, and they do a report. And again, it's a snapshot. It's not the full on everything that happens each and every day, but a really good snapshot of what happens in January of each year. And so this is the report from 2020. This was on a single night in January, approximately 580,000 people, a little close to 581,000 people were experiencing homelessness in the United States. The report goes into exactly where in the communities, in the nation, by demographics. I mean, there's a lot of information there, but this is the aggregate in the country. And again, it's a snapshot that happens. And to remember that this happened pre-COVID. So, what has been the implications of the pandemic is, of course, of concern, and we need to look at that. The other thing, and this is what we've been talking about this morning, the level of unsheltered homelessness too has also risen, and mostly in the West, but not necessarily everywhere. There's been different levels everywhere, but California and Nevada, we had some conversations already this morning. Huge number of people who experience homelessness do so either through encampments or some other form of unsheltered homelessness. So the visual piece there and the impacts in open spaces obviously is more acute in some areas than others. What is USICH? What is this thing called USICH? USICH has been around actually since the late 80s through the Stuart B. McKinney Homeless Assistance Act of 1987 and recently reauthorized with the Hearth Act in 2009. We coordinate the federal response. We are a tiny, tiny interagency. There's about 20 of us total when we're fully staffed. There are 19 different federal agencies that comprise of the council, of which one member from each federal agency serves on this council, meets quarterly, We have interagency working groups. We then look at how do we coordinate all the federal agencies on the issue of ending homelessness in America. So ones that you particularly think of like HUD, HHS, the VA, but also the post office, also the Department of Labor, Department of Justice, the Domestic Policy Council and the White House. EPA is not in here, which is kind of interesting considering this kind of conversation, but Homeland Security is. So FEMA is certainly part of this conversation as well. I'm a regional coordinator, so I'm based in Santa Barbara. I cover California and Arizona as part of my connections of what I'd like to say connects research with reality. I'd like to find out what's happening on the ground, connect with local stakeholders and statewide, and then we share best practices. So my team is 5 members around the country and certainly can connect you to your regional coordinator as well. Both elected officials, faith-based groups, business leaders, the private sector, philanthropy, making those connections is our work, and then bringing that up to the federal government. What we mean by ending homelessness, our operational definition is we look at a comprehensive response that we want to prevent homelessness when we can, but if it can't be prevented, we want to make it a rare, brief, and one-time experience. And there's processes in place that we have through a use of criteria and benchmarks to monitor and analyze and assess if an area has indeed reduced or ended homelessness. And there are areas that have done this. So, you know, there are success stories that are out there. I wanted to take just a couple minutes and talk a little bit about the impact we saw with COVID-19, because it relates to the rise of encampments that we've seen and the opportunities of terms of funding and collaboration that comes from that. You know, during COVID, all of our work really was to make sure to reduce the loss of life, reduce the spread of COVID, and really trying to not to do what we can so that our healthcare and hospitalization was not overwhelmed with people experiencing homelessness or anyone who became COVID positive. So that we had an immediate strong response in dealing to limit exposure. And in fact, we thought there'd be a lot stronger cases of positive cases amongst people experiencing homelessness around the country. And we didn't really see that because of the immediate work of trying to keep people in non-congregate areas with the services that they need and encampments. The CDC was very much involved in this. And you may have heard from this that they really advised that encampment areas not be dispersed or cleaned up in order to reduce the mitigation and the spread of COVID. I think one of the impacts that had happened because of that, what some people interpreted not clearing a camp as not engaging with the people in the camp, which of course we always want to do that. We always want to reach out and figure out how are better ways for people to reach some other form of safety and shelter and housing. But we have seen across some areas a rise in encampments, both in number and size. But one of the opportunities we did also see is a much stronger connection between the homeless and service providers and public health across the levels, whether it be county or statewide, and really seeing homelessness as a public health crisis. And what can we do moving forward in keeping those opportunities and partnerships intact and strong? I mentioned some of the impacts. The number, size, and locations of encampments have grown in some areas. The significant staff and burnout, and I'm sure in your field as well, for a variety of reasons with COVID and just changing the way we have to do work under this pandemic, how important it was to keep vigilant about reducing the spread. Well, if you're in the social service world and dealing with a lot of people in encampments or in shelters, the level of burnout has been really significant. And on the flip side, though, there was ways that we could figure out how can we utilize and connect different sources of funding to achieve a common goal. And one of the things that happened in the last year was bringing FEMA in with homeless service providers in providing reimbursement for non-congregate shelter. FEMA wasn't there to say we need to solve homelessness. FEMA came in to say we need to really mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And we know that congregate shelter could create major impacts in terms of rising of positive cases. So we will reimburse local governments in providing non-congregate shelter to individuals experiencing homelessness in order to mitigate the spread of COVID. And that is still going on today. And it was a game changer in terms of opportunities that were available, but it also brought two organizations or two parts of government that don't normally talk to each other to start talking to each other and connect where we could. So moving forward, we're trying to, this was a seminar we did last summer in Detroit, and the quote I think really says a lot, right? If it's unacceptable for people to remain homeless during COVID, how can we go back to it being acceptable afterwards? What is it that we can do moving forward with what we've learned, with especially all this new funding coming forward to, change the way back to normal in some areas was not good. And we've heard from this morning that there were challenges even pre-COVID related to encampments and safety and all the things we talked about today. So what are things that we need to think about? I mentioned this, the staff fatigue and capacity challenges, trying to deal with consisting with people who are most vulnerable, helping people move from non-congregate or congregate shelter into permanent housing, how to continue strong contact with those in housing who may be unstable, and trying to deal with eviction prevention as well. A lot of things happening in that world. So some funding issues, as we know, some huge funding opportunities came about with the CARES Act last year. And this was part of the CARES Act of emergency solutions grants that's still funding that hasn't totally been allocated yet. And so this is still funding that is still being implemented. These are opportunities where you could use for congregate shelter, non-congregate shelter, outreach, client engagement work, housing search and placement, rapid rehousing. And what I guess my message to you here today is, where are the partnerships that could happen that could be strengthened in order to bring in a new source of funding that may not be flood control related, but relate entirely to reaching out to people experiencing homelessness in waterways in order to get them into housing. So you're not just managing the problem, you're creating a solution. Then with the American Rescue Plan that was just passed in March, there's significant funding in there to deal with the issue of the challenges that we have with homelessness. That goes beyond just the next few months. There's some funding that can be available over a course of a number of years. So I have here on the screen just what a number of them, but $5 billion have been allocated to local governments on development affordable housing, tent-based rent and assistance, supportive services. So again, where the partnerships that you may have with your local government, you can look to see how much of this funding came to the city of Vegas or the county of Orange or wherever it is that you are, and say, well, what are the partnerships there that we can do to move this forward and connect with people who are in encampments, in waterways and other flood control areas to get them into housing. USICH has a number of resources available and papers that we've put out and dealing with, just information that we can provide and curate for you. Again, we're not going to solve every issue right now, right here, but we do want to be a resource for you moving forward. I can connect you to who your regional coordinator is if you're not in California and Arizona, like where I am. But best practices, peer-to-peer calls, those are the kind of things that we can offer as well. So this panel today, and I'm almost done here, but it helped me create a new acronym. We all love talking in acronyms, I know, in governmentese, and I thought flow was good, right? It has to do with water, but flow is also actually a term we use in the homelessness services world to talk about what is the flow from people getting from the street and into housing. And if there's a temporary shelter arrangement, what is the flow of people going through a shelter into permanent housing? But of course, trying to figure out the best practices of an acronym. So funding, how do you braid local, state, and federal resources together for maximum impact and leveraging it? The low barrier approach in dealing with shelter and housing opportunities. Here you hear a lot about, we offer shelter, but they don't want it, they'd rather be here. Well, the question is, well, why is that? What is the barrier? Do they have pets? Do they have possessions? Is there a sobriety kind of issue? Is there a safety issue that they perceive in what's being offered? Would they rather be out on their own than in a shelter with 200 people? Those are the kind of things we need to figure out and break down those barriers. Keeping those outreach services, the O, in terms of consistent and continual, and there was a lot of talk this morning about that as well. And then the W, a whole person care. The housing support is important. We believe in a housing first model, meaning getting someone into housing, providing them that shelter, then figuring out what exactly that individual needs, whether it is detox assistance, whether it's a job, whether it's connecting with family, whether it's just hearing if it's a domestic violence situation, whatever it is, and looking at that whole person care, doing it in a way that provides equity, listening to people with lived experience for what it is that they need. From California, I know you're not all from California, but as an example of how to braid in different state and local funding and federal funds, the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, another agency you probably never heard of, was recently established, and they have done some great ways of looking at how to prioritize funding that's out there. And then looking at, as I mentioned, the FEMA reimbursement that came up about non-congregate shelter. FEMA California created a program called Project Room Key to harness all of that funding to help local communities deal with providing non-congregate shelter, and then actually acquiring motels and hotels into permanent housing over time, and the funding that was available through the federal government to make that work. So I'll just end here, which is there's always, I think, 4 ingredients for success, right? One is political will. Doesn't have to be from an elected official, although of course that's helpful, but each of us in our own way have our own level of authority and jurisdiction and philosophy in using that political will to make things happen. It's not just the use of it's not just what the resources are, but effective use of it, how to connect with each other, which means it takes that collaborative approach. You do flood control. You don't do social services. Other people do social services. What are the connections that can happen that can maximize the expertise of each of us coming together towards a common goal? And then finally, a never give up attitude. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, 20, 30 times to get engaged with an individual to make it happen, but it can work, and it needs that continual never give up attitude. This is how you can get a hold of me. Sunny will have all the slides. I know I went through them really quickly, but I want to thank you again. And I hope, again, this is the beginning of a conversation we can have over time. So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Helene. That's a really great presentation. I think you answered a lot of questions on the members' minds of NASMA about how to engage with the federal government and coordination between the different agencies. And it's just really refreshing to see an organization like this, and I really look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you very much for that presentation. Next, we'll move on to Mr. Nick Schufro with FEMA, and when you're ready, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to participate today in this session sponsored by NASMA. It's an important session and an important conversation. And over the last couple of hours, I've learned quite a bit already, including in the last presentation. I'm not smart enough to come up with an acronym, but I'll flow into one of the things that I like to talk about is getting outside of our own respective echo chambers and how we need to engage with others involved in other aspects of what we do. So I approach today's conversation with a bit of posture of humility and commitment to learn from people who bring their experience to the table, and we want to look to make connections between equity and risk management. So like Ms. Schneider on the Interagency Council on Homelessness, we need to get outside of our echo chambers, and I look forward to making connections. A little bit of background, I joined FEMA as a senior executive in 2016. I'm the Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Risk Management Directorate, which is part of the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, or FIMA. FIMA is a component of FEMA, which is part of Department of Homeland Security, and so we've got a very active portfolio. Steve Parrish went through a little bit of my bio and talked about some of the things that we do. We are responsible for the flood risk mapping program, which is a large program as it involves trying to develop flood risk maps for communities across the nation. We also are responsible for the National Dam Safety and Levee Safety programs, building codes, planning, mitigation planning for local authorities, supporting the earthquake preparedness programs, just a variety of things. And FIMA's specific objectives include increasing awareness of flood risk through identification and publication of flood hazard information, reducing the impacts of floods through hazard mitigation, floodplain management, and building codes, delivering hazard mitigation assistance grants for floods and all hazard mitigation. And now we have a new principle of implementing our programs with equity to increase resilience for all communities, which is a good tie into what we're doing and talking about today. So many people, when they think about FEMA, they have this image of people being plucked off of flooded homes by helicopter, or people walking around with windbreakers, FEMA windbreakers, taking disaster survivor information from people who just lost their homes or whatever. But in reality, we do a lot of interagency coordination. And we have, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a couple of minutes, but under the Stafford Act, we have incredible mission assigning capabilities. And we are increasingly becoming aware for adapting our coordination capabilities to help our partners across the nation address challenging and complex incidents. So a couple of examples of things that we're doing now that are new for us, less traditional roles. FEMA has been in the news in the last couple of months in the working with DHS in the Southwest border region as we see increasing rates of unaccompanied children coming to the country. We also have taken a very active role over the last 14 months in the development of COVID-19 vaccination sites. So we've used our logistical support, analysis, and abilities not to actually put shots in arms, but to set up the centers, the federally supported centers where these vaccinations are taking place. And the administration set a goal of 200 million vaccines, and we all know that last week we celebrated that in advance of the first 100 days, which is actually today of the new administration. So that was achieved last week. And then we've taken on an expansion of some of our existing programs. So one that we launched about 2.5 weeks ago was the COVID-19 Funeral Assistance Program. So FEMA has always had the ability to provide funding for funeral assistance for disaster survivors or their families. We launched a program, and I was fortunate to actually be able to volunteer and do intake for a couple of hours. We had 1.1 million calls the first day, and we've already made contact with 110,000 survivors or families who lost somebody to COVID. And we're providing funding to the tune of about $9,500 per life lost. And 2.5 weeks into the program, checks have already gone out the door. So these are things where you don't necessarily associate FEMA with these activities, but those are things that we're doing right now. In terms of some of our priorities, we're looking at a couple of presidential executive orders that came out earlier this year, which have a bearing on this discussion today. So there's an executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. That's EEO 13985. There's an executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. There's an executive order on protecting public health and the environment and restoring science to tackle the climate crisis, and an executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And all of these executive orders have some kind of impact into our discussions today. As I mentioned earlier, we have the ability under the Stafford Act to mission assign other agencies. So as an example, when you look at some of the flooding, it's normally the Coast Guard that plucks people off of rooftops in flooded homes. And when we're collecting the data, which we do collect from disaster survivors, we often turn this information over to our other agencies, such as HUD or Human Health Services, that can actually provide services that are needed to disaster survivors. It's important to note that when we're working, we serve a coordination function, but contrary to popular belief, we don't just show up unannounced. We have to be invited in by a state governor or a Commonwealth governor, and we have a mantra of federally supported, state managed, and locally executed. So the discussions earlier today from some of the presentations on what's happening at the local level is incredibly important to us, because that's where the rubber hits the road. We can help support, the state can manage, but it really is important for the localities to get involved. And we're looking at increasingly serving underserved and historically marginalized populations. And the reason that we're doing that is we recognize that if folks don't have money, or they don't have access to education, or they have housing issues, etc., they're going to be moving to sort of the lower cost areas. So whether it's in a culvert or a less populated area which doesn't have services available, people are going to move there, and that makes them even more vulnerable. And so as we sit there and we look at developing our programs, we're looking to make sure that we have equity, social equity, as we're also seeing a change in the climate, and we're seeing more thunderstorms, more storms, more water coming in. We recognize this is also an issue. So climate change and the future conditions is also important. I want to close just by just highlighting one change that happened this week at FEMA, which I think is really, really important, which is we have a new administrator. Ms. Deanna Criswell came in. She was welcomed on Monday, sworn in. She's the first female administrator of the agency. And this is a defining moment, worthy of celebration. She's an exceptional emergency manager. We can say that because she was with FEMA at one point. But her career includes work as a local firefighter and paramedic, 21 years in the Colorado Air National Guard, local government emergency management, and most recently she was the Commissioner of Emergency Management in New York City. And New York City, while the numbers that were just presented show that New York City has only 5% of people living in unsheltered environments, we all know that there is a larger population in New York City of homeless folks. And so we believe that her experience in New York City will be very valuable to our conversations going forward. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Schufel. We really appreciate you attending today and providing your insight. It's really good to hear about the executive orders and the equity in action, and understanding that there can be a nexus for FEMA to help us deal with some of these issues, and finding a way to do that is one of the reasons that we're here today, to try to get that conversation going. So really appreciate your attending today. Next, we'll move on to Mr. Stephen Hill with the Homeland Security. If you could come off, there you go.
I will share screen.
I'll just point out for the record that it says Stephanie Bray on as your name, but
you are very good. Yeah, that's my teammate, so I'm going to introduce her. And I'm not, are you seeing it? Is this something, Stephen, you can push and just pull up as well? Could you share mine, or is it just on me?
I think it's on you, unless you sent the presentation. Did Stephanie send the presentation to you, Sunny?
No, and maybe if you see it, you hit the button towards the right, like there's one more button to hit share screen. So like pull up share screen, click on what you want, and then there's a button down at the bottom right to get it.
Yeah, and for some reason it is not. Let me see here. I do know what I'm doing, and I'm trained on this. Let's just try one more.
Was the last presentation unshared?
Yeah, I think we're.
Yeah, it's given me a security message, and I'm not on a. Let's see.
If you want to email it to me too. Oh, I think it's working.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you're up.
You know, it's just sometimes from Washington, D.C., it takes just a little tiny bit longer. Okay, does that look okay?
Yes, looks good.
I can.
All right, I think this is just kind of an example of what we're dealing with. You know, it's we're all under fire to do the best job we can, move quickly, think on our feet. And Steve, thanks to you, Sonny, and the NASMA team for the chance to join the panel today. You know, it was great as well listening to Miss Abigail Morena on the Clark County Flood Control District, because I think she had a lot of detail in there, and it really gets a little bit to the point of there's an awful lot of different layers on this that need to be dealt with. And especially with Ms. Schneider, ingredients towards success and flow. Wow, I love that. So, Mr. Schufro, I know your mind is racing and my mind is racing. And, you know, I love it so much because it's how we get our head around a complicated problem. There's no better compliment than to try and do product improvement. So I'm going to call it Flow T. Flow T, and the T is the teamwork, and that's Steve, what you and the team are kind of conjuring up, because we're all learning an awful lot of things here, and I think that gets at the point. You know, we're all experts perhaps, but none of us have all of the answers, and the challenges that are ahead of us are pretty significant. So I'll just kind of jump on in here, and you know, I know most of the folks that are on the call have some pretty good context about the Corps of Engineers. But it is a little bit of a confusing organization. And on this slide, I just want to key in on vision in the top right, engineering solutions. And that sounds simple, but the challenges are complicated, just like this one. And so the engineering solutions are not always just as quick to pop on the surface, you think. And I think that's the value that the Corps of Engineers team hopes to bring to this team, to this table. We're operating in locations all across the US and have responsibilities in nearly 110 other nations, as well as our technical breadth with our centers, labs, and staff across the nation. We see that as a strength. At a high level, I also just kind of put in my commercial for the organization, even for folks that may know the Corps historically. You know, number one, we're very focused on delivering our program. We take that more and more seriously. In the business that we're all in, we've got to show progress and product, whether it's part of our military program, our civil works program, our research and development program, or an area where I spend an awful lot of my time, contingency operations support to the nation. Delivering and getting it done is at the top of the list. And then also increasing focus on promoting and maintaining a positive command climate. That's retaining and recruiting some of the best staff across the nation. We want the best. All of our agencies want the best folks. Our industry partners want the best folks. And we've got to encourage them to make them feel like they're part of something that's very significant. And in doing so, we're committed to advancing diversity, inclusion, and belonging in our formations. Because if people don't feel like they belong to be part of this, who wants to contribute and pull on the rope to find the solutions that we're talking about here today? And then, of course, an obligation I believe we all have in our agencies, in government, and then with industry is growing that next generation of leaders. That's something that I think is very important to us, and we take that very seriously. And while we've got a diverse team of nearly 35,000 staff, they're pretty dispersed. All have got different set of missions and a slightly different perspective. And so on this next slide, I think the best way to look at the Corps of Engineers is, again, eat the elephant one bite at a time. There's 6 priority mission areas. You could talk to somebody else in the Corps of Engineers and they might describe it slightly different. That's kind of the beauty of it. And that's also the complicated nature of it. But I think, you know, our work in water resources, which is really critical, is primarily through our Civil Works Directorate. And then also within the flood risk management mission, we have a responsibility to maintain public safety by protecting people and property from flooding. That ties very closely here. And partnering with me on all of this through NASMA is Dr. Stephanie Bray. I appreciate using her connectivity here today, and hence her name. I'm giving her a high five because she does just incredible work. And we design and construct the flood risk management infrastructure, such as the levees and the channels. But in most cases, operation of the infrastructure projects are the responsibility of the local sponsor, which is where a lot of time our teams partner and periodically interface. This means, however, that the maintenance is typically a local sponsor responsibility rather than a responsibility of the Corps of Engineers that may have some authorities over the overall flood reduction structures. And USACE typically, and most folks I think know this, we're supposed to execute based on where our authorities are and where our fundings are. And USACE doesn't receive funding for the maintenance. So that sometimes puts us in a tough place, even though our people live there and they want to do more. From emergency management perspective, USACE, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I think the federal government overall have become involved only when specific assistance is requested locally, and typically then only after local and state resources have been exhausted. And I think, we work with FEMA a whole lot, especially Emergency Support Function 3 role. And, as eager as we get sometimes, maybe even more eager, like you saw with General Semonite, Previous Chief of Engineers on the ACF for COVID, we get out there. Sometimes, we get very aggressive in it, but, we work for FEMA or we work for the local or state community effort in all of these type of things that are outside of our immediate authority. And we like to be good partners in doing that, even though we're enthusiastic and passionate about what needs to occur. I want to just touch on this slide. And again, I don't mean to be too much of a commercial, but what I'm trying to blend in, I'm just coming from 10 years with industry. I know the Corps of Engineers, I've worked for the government, I've got the background, but I just spent 10 years with industry. And my industry partners sometimes looked at some of the government teams, the Corps of Engineers, as just USACE, faceless, nameless, all created equal. That's not true. Like you all, we are people. We are people who are committed, who we have feelings, we're passionate about what we do and our jobs. Sometimes we get overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenges we face. So I want to put a few faces in names to really, when you say USACE, we can drill down and you can get to the person that might be the most helpful or the most appropriate. And then I'll let you know that each one of these leaders on the slide values the opportunity to try and develop engineering solutions while being good partners, communicating as well as we can, and most importantly, new focus on listening as we try to really seek to understand a delivery of what we believe are our primary responsibilities. And on the slide, I'd like to point out just a couple of folks. One is in the top left of the slide, Major General Graham, Butch Graham. And then right there in the middle is Mr. Al Lee. Really the Deputy Commanding General for USACE is General Graham, and the Director for Civil Works is Mr. Lee. Two key folks that drive the culture, the organization, the resources, and kind of the themes that we're pushing now for partnership, listening, communication, and then how we coordinate with our partners to go ahead and execute our responsibilities within the authorities that we have. And then also I point out kind of on the bottom left, Mr. Tom Smith. He's the Chief for Operations and Regulatory Division. Quiet professional, super person, field guy, been out there, knows the business. But a lot of this effort on the operations side of some of these facilities and projects lie under his purview from a policy and resourcing standpoint and engagement with Congress on how we do business. So, I'm always glad to help facilitate connections with other people. And then I think the other person on there, I just point out is in the center, that's me. I couldn't do any one of those three things they have listed under there. But I've got a great team that contribute to each one of those. And that's the Office of Homeland Security Police. And I highlight the Stafford Act and PL, Public Law 8499, which really says we can build some things back after emergency response. So there's a funding stream associated with that, which is why I point that out. And I think that ties me very closely to the NASMA team and what Dr. Stephanie Bray and the team is working on a regular basis. So now let me just jump into a little bit more, perhaps, of the meat. We know solutions are needed, and we know that there's an awful lot of people who are experiencing homelessness with some exceptional vulnerabilities that are due to external social, economic, political factors. And that needs to be taken into consideration. I think some of that's been highlighted. That's why this has been as much of a learning session and an opportunity for me to listen and then roll back with our team. In addition, no doubt there are other challenges experienced by the USACE team, the Corps of Engineer team, and our partners who understand the flood risk management infrastructure business. And it's important that the solutions and the efforts that we're all striving for consider kind of these factors as well. And I think most folks know them, but I appreciate the chance to highlight a couple. Clearly, there are a variety of public safety and health concerns that have been alluded to, including the individuals experiencing homelessness themselves, as well as to the Corps of Engineer employees, local sponsors, contractors, or the flood reduction management project infrastructure itself. And that's where we kind of put a lens on and we look at that. While the Corps of Engineers may not typically be involved in the day-to-day operations and the maintenance portion specifically, given the sponsor responsibilities for those activities, the Corps of Engineers does have responsibility for keeping employees, including the contractors, and the local community involved in the construction work or on site safe. There have been a number of incidents where there's been vandalism to the facilities, always waste costs, or construction equipment, which hinders the ability to complete required project works on the infrastructure projects. It never benefits anyone, and it can interfere with the ability to ensure the infrastructure is providing the necessary flood reduction management benefits as intended. Is kind of a primary responsibility. Not that safety is not number one, but also we've got to hit that project requirement. Locations within the flood risk management infrastructure project footprint, clearly are not safe locations for encampments. They impact the populations when there's an emergency situation requiring operations of the project that need to move quickly and need to be considered. So a plan for evacuation for these situations is necessary. As typical channels to communicate risk and evacuation requirements like reverse 911 would not work for these populations. And in the realm of public health concerns, including potential water quality and sanitation issues due to debris itself and other contamination from debris at the encampments are all things we need to be considering. In terms of operations, the projects have been many impacts. Encampment footprints have been blocked, blocking normal operations and maintenance for projects. We're experiencing that in some cases now. Required expenditures of resources in order to deal with safety and removal of the camps do impact maintenance in some of the other areas as well. In addition, just to highlight a couple other points, perhaps, that directly impact their operations of the projects, encampment removal and debris cleanup is an unfunded mission. So it always creates that challenge on the agency, on the organization, on the local team, even though there's a lot of folks and it's a big budget, it's hard to sort out how you're going to do that in a legal way. Risk of wildfires is something that's real. We've seen that here recently and is a big issue, especially in California, Oregon, Washington, and Pacific Northwest. USACE does have some experience and resources that can contribute to the broader interagency solutions to these challenges. Ultimately, USACE has a responsibility for public safety, as I acknowledged, and USACE has some experience improving security measures at our flood risk management infrastructure projects that limit unauthorized access. Our primary mission in this area is reducing the degree to which people and property are at risk from flooding, which means we need to do all we can in partnership with our sponsors to ensure the infrastructure is able to operate as intended in a safe way. And in some cases, USACE does not always have direct responsibility, as mentioned, on the operations and maintenance side. Another key point, USACE is interfacing regularly with Congress and the administration, and we can carry messages regarding the need for additional funding, additional legislation, and address issues associated with the encampments around flood risk management infrastructure projects. That's, of course, best done, I think, when we have alignment, partner alignment, this team, with all of our partners regarding the best approaches. And, as I noted, we have a lot of technical expertise with our labs and that type of stuff. I won't drill down in the interest of time on that because I think most folks really understand, where we work at a high level and then how we do seek to try and get down into some of the specifics for the technical aspects, the engineering aspects of what we do. And on this slide, and I've only got a couple others, I'll end with just kind of another key point. We're big believers increasingly, especially now with the current Chief of Engineers, Lieutenant General Scott Spellman, on interagency partnership efforts. We have authorities that allow us to convene interagency partnerships and forums that might be useful in establishing new and strengthening old or new partnerships that will be needed to address these challenges. We've not historically worked with agencies that can provide social services assistance, for example, but that seems like an area that's ripe for new collaboration, and we're seeing some of that that you're bringing to the surface here. We clearly don't have all the answers. A lot of this is new to us. Right now, we believe our contribution to the eventual solutions may not be large. We never know, but we're committed to remaining a part of the discussion and contributing as much as we're able to as we look at this from a comprehensive menu of solutions perspective. And just, to try and end on a couple positive thoughts here, we do have some prioritization of activity, and we'll always key in on focus on safety. So I'll highlight that. I won't drill down on it much more because, again, I think it's been touched on. I think it's critical. And our teams realize that that is the most critical aspect of what we do. When we lose people, and I've been in that situation, you never get that out of your head, and you ask those questions, was there anything else that we could do? And I think that puts the pressure on our shoulders to keep that in the back of our minds and say, how can we do better? How can we do more? Not more with less, perhaps, but work together as a team so that we've got partner alignment as well as that vertical alignment that we talk about in the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that all effort, all calories are put on solutions, not on friction among our partners. I learned that from my mother too. She demanded that from me and my sister, even though occasionally we went at it. And then I guess I'm just going to end by touching on a few best practices. I won't drill down on these, but if indeed we're in a situation where we need to deal with an encampment that's impacting or high risk or a security piece, we know that we've got liaisons that are working in the communities. Would love to volunteer USACE employees to be liaisons and build the partnership more. Always early coordination. We've got our park rangers. We can conduct outreach. There's an awful lot of things that I think can be done. This discussion stimulates thoughts of what we can take back with our partners, with our internal team to determine how we can best help out. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Ms. Parrish, turn it back over to you and taking notes as well as prepare to answer questions if we have any time left.
That's great, and thank you so much, Mr. Hill, for that presentation and your comments. I think the goal, one of the main goals of this mentoring session was to get the federal partners to the table and start the conversation going, and I think we certainly did that today. I learned a lot from all three of you, and I really appreciate your attendance. We are running a little bit long. I keep getting texts from Sunny saying, "Well, we can go a few more minutes." We did have one question that came into the chat, and Helene actually answered it regarding outreach and how to, if there are any prepared messaging or communication strategies that are available that can be used by the local agencies to try to deal with the frustrations that some nonprofits and other homeless advocates have when dealing with the issues of encampment cleanups and that type of thing. And I don't know if you want to touch on that again. I don't think everyone can see the answer in the chat, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think I just responded directly to Shannon, but the messaging and telling the story is always a challenge, right? Because people see what they see, and what I like to say is success is invisible. All the work that happens to get people into housing, when that happens, you don't see it anymore, right? And people see what doesn't work. And so how to understand and acknowledge the frustration there and still tell a story in a way that is meaningful. I can certainly I will reach out to Shannon, but please look at our website. If there's specific areas, I can connect you with our regional coordinator in your area. And there's, there's lots of information out there. You want to curate the right thing.
Great, thank you. I think, speaking for NASMA, that we're really looking forward to working with all of your agencies to continue this discussion and see if we can produce some meaningful, fixes and responses to this homeless issue, and see if there's some things we can do to make things better and improve the quality of life for some people that are at highest risk out there in the across the country. So, Sunny, I think we'll probably have to end it there. Do you want to just wrap up?
Yeah, thank you all for hanging on with us and going a little along. We appreciate everybody's time and participation. And obviously, this is such a complex issue, and it's going to take all hands on deck. To work on this. And today was really the first step of creating this awareness amongst each other and starting that conversation, that collaboration, and as Mr. Hill brought up, that teamwork. So we really appreciate everybody being here and getting out of our echo chambers and thinking together around this. It's an emerging issue and it's increasing fast with COVID and the housing crisis. But the good news is we all show up and we all care about our communities and we can do hard things. So let's dig in on that and work together. And this is the first, I think, of many conversations that NASMA is going to sponsor and continue on and provide resources to all our public works agencies and flood risk and stormwater management agencies. We will continue this conversation at our annual meeting. So go to our website and pay attention to that and see and get on, we'll shoot out things through other mailing lists to keep everybody in tune with what we're doing to help everyone. There are some follow-up questions that we didn't get to that are big topics. I think the messaging is an important one that came up a few times, and then supporting O&M staff. So we'll look around about how can we answer those and provide support to everybody on there on those really important topics. And we couldn't have done this without all our moderators and panelists that put significant time into meeting before and preparing their presentations. So really thank you all for being here and giving up your valuable time to talk with us. So on that note, stay safe, stay healthy out there, and thank you all for being here. And we'll send out presentations, materials, all that, all those kind of questions that popped up after the meeting, because we've got a list of everybody that was registered. So thank you all, and we'll go ahead and end the webinar.
Thanks, everybody.